Hello and welcome to DCS How to Fly, a series where I intend to teach you the basics of certain aircraft in DCS 1.5. In today's tutorial we will be looking at the basic operation of the A10-A, the less complex variant of the A10-C. In this particular video I will cover the startup, taxiing, takeoff and landing procedures, and some basic principles of flight in the aircraft. Before I begin, here are some keybinds I would recommend setting up as they will be useful for today's video. Left and right engine start, left and right engine stop, flaps up and down, toggle landing flaps, landing gear toggle, canopy toggle, electricity, communications menu, air brake toggle, wheel brakes and eject. With that over with, let's begin. Startup in the A10-A is a far cry from the complexity of the A10-C, requiring only a few switches and buttons. First of all, turn on your electrics, then turn on your navigation lights, right control and L, and your cockpit lights, L. Gear lights won't be needed today as we're flying in the daytime. Once your lights are on, start your left engine. Using the dials on the bottom right of the instrument panel, watch the RPM carefully. When it reaches 40%, you can start your right engine. Once both engines are spun up to 64% RPM, close the canopy and release your wheel brakes by tapping the keybind, and throttle up to 10 to 15% to begin taxiing. Taxiing in the A10-A is not as easy as it would seem. The aircraft has an offset nose wheel to make room for the 30mm cannon, meaning that at high speeds the aircraft tends to veer off course, making corrections dangerous. For this reason, taxiing should be kept slow and steady, not only to keep the aircraft straight, but to avoid collision with any hangars. At high speeds, use small inputs of rudder to ensure that the wings do not dip and scrape along the ground. Now that we've taxied to the runway, line yourself up with the centerline and stop your aircraft with your wheel brakes. Lower your flaps to the takeoff position and check your control surfaces. Looking at your HUD, your airspeed readout is on the left hand side, provided in knots. When you are ready, hold in your brakes and throttle up. Once your engines are spinning at 100% RPM, release the brakes and begin your run. When your airspeed hits 100 knots, begin pulling back on the stick. Try and get the stick about 2/3 of the way back before you hit 120 knots. Unloaded, the aircraft should lift off the ground at 130 to 150 knots. Be careful not to scrape your tail along the ground when lifting off the ground, keeping a shallow angle until you are safely above the runway. Raise your landing gear, and when your landing gear is up, raise your flaps. Now that we're in the air, we can talk about some of the characteristics of the A10-A. Firstly, it rolls stupidly fast, something that you're going to want to use to your advantage in combat, especially in close air support situations. Secondly, the A10-A has variable air brakes. By that, I mean you can set the air brakes at different angles. A full cycle on the air brakes requires you to press the air brake toggle 3 times, the first to extend, the second to lock, and the third to retract. If you lock the air brakes whilst they are still extending, you can control how far they extend, perhaps using larger extensions for a steeper dive or descent. Third, the A10-A isn't exactly going to win any turning fights, so avoid dogfighting at all costs. The A10-A is incredibly easy to stall in the turn, so pay attention to the G warning alarm that sounds when you are risking a stall. Finally, the A10-A is extremely slow, reaching top speeds of no more than 350 to 400 knots at low levels, or 450 to 500 in a dive. To finish our flight, we're going to touch down at Sochi. To begin your approach, fly to the right and parallel of the runway at about 3,000 to 4,000 feet, before banking right and then left, getting yourself lined up with the runway. As a side note, when you finish your banking, your altitude should be no lower than 3,000 feet, as this gives you time to react or abort your landing. Once aligned, zero the throttle, extend your air brakes fully, lower your flaps to the takeoff position, lower your gear, and tell ATC that you're coming in hot. Once you are cleared to land, lower your flaps all the way and start juggling the throttle, ensuring that your airspeed does not dip below 130 knots. After you've crossed the runway threshold, flare up to around 15 degrees and let your wheels touch down. As soon as they do, push the nose all the way forward, begin tapping the brakes as soon as your nose wheel hits the ground. Taxi to your parking area, open the canopy, raise the flaps, retract the air brakes, turn off the lights, shut down your engines and turn off your electricity. Lastly, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or if it helped out in any way, make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Ta-ra.